Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is a lovely rainy Chicago morning, so you may hear the sound of the pitter-pattering of the raindrops in the background. Princeton University Press has a new book out. Here's a copy of it, Write Like a Man by Ronnie Grinberg. And I don't have this book, but it's the sort of book that were I younger, I would probably pick up and read. It is, let's see what it says here. Ronnie Grinberg's Write Like a Man examines how virility and Jewishness became hallmarks of post-war New York's combative intellectual scene. That phrase is important. There's been something since I've been on BookTube that I've thought a lot about, actually, which is, well, there have been a couple of dust-ups here and there, and once in a while somebody would say something, say, remarking about another booktuber, and everybody would get all upset. And he's doing his thing. And one time, one booktuber, one of my favorite booktubers actually said, that's it, I'm off the platform. I'm not going to make videos anymore because this guy talked about another booktuber in a way that shouldn't be done. Why, this person has a family, has kids, and how can you talk about somebody like that? Well, I know how you can talk about somebody like that. That is because the old literary milieu, the one which was dominant at the time that I was trying to break out, was like that. It was, writers took something of a no-holds-barred approach. The pen, indeed, was a sword, and if you wrote, you would slash. And this book from Princeton gives me the first sense I've understood of why or how that milieu came to be so. When you get older, you realize that things are not the way they are because they have to be, or because that is the only way that they can be, but just because somehow that's the way they have come to be. And I believe that the literary world has possibly become more friendly, like in my sphere in poetry. There would be arguments all the time. Your kind of poetry is bad, it's garbage, but mine is good, and then the other person would say the other thing. And I don't think that sort of approach flies anymore. It's more, let a thousand flowers bloom approach. Just, let everybody have their space, and no need to be so cantankerous about it. So learning about this New York intellectual community gave me to think. Its influence and spread, I believe, was everywhere. Of course, in Chicago, we had, at that time, Saul Bellow, who is included as a New York intellectual. So Princeton has put online for free the first chapter, and I don't think I have time to read this book now, but I thought I would just share you some excerpts. I'm not quite, as I say, sure that I've pulled out all of the right pieces, but let me just read you the first couple of paragraphs. This again from Ronnie Grinberg's Write Like a Man, which examines how virility and Jewishness became hallmarks of post-war New York's combative intellectual scene. A lot of the names referred to we don't remember very much anymore, but some have had staying power. Unless a man in the intellectual community was bent on sexual conquest, he was never interested in women, Diana Trilling recalled of the New York intellectuals, a renowned group of writers and critics at mid-century. He wanted to be with the men. They always wanted to huddle in a corner to talk. Their shop talk did not include women, even the women whom they had regard for professionally. And that ends the quote by Trilling. Trilling was one of the few women in this group. She entered their ranks when she married literary critic Lionel Trilling. Others, I've tried to read him and not gotten very far, but he is a big influence on, oh, now I can't think of his name, a guy, Adam something, who writes some pretty nice stuff. That doesn't give you much to go on, does it? Others echoed her comments. Jason Epstein, for example, who co-founded the New York Review of Books in 1963, said, "With women in that crowd, the first thing you thought about was whether they were good-looking and if you could sleep with them. But if a woman could write like a man, that was enough. You wanted a piece of writing. You'd forget everything else for a good piece." Epstein, of course, left a certain ambiguity as to whether he meant a piece of writing or a piece of ass. But his remarks, along with Trilling's, underscore the importance of virility in this testosterone-driven literary circle. What did masculinity mean to these intellectuals? Epstein's directive to write like a man indicated that the act of writing itself constituted a form of masculine performance. But what did writing like a man entail? And the literary milieu was replete with figures that seemed, well, to use the word that they are going to use in a second in this in the next paragraph, pugilistic. Literary critic Irving Howe, another member of the group, hinted at an answer in 1968 when he chronicled its shared history. Writing in commentary, Howe used pugilistic terms to describe the group. Its members saw, quote, intellectual life as a form of combat, he said. They developed that attitude when they were anti-Stalinist radicals in the 1930s. Debates within the group constituted a tournament, the writer as gymnast with one eye on other rings or as a skilled infighter juggling knives of dialectic, unquote. These intellectuals embodied a, quote, style of brilliance, unquote, Howe said, that at its best, quote, reflected a certain view of the intellectual life. Freelance dash, peacock strut, daring hypothesis, knockabout synthesis, unquote. In summarizing what bound the group together, Howe wrote, they appear to have a common history, prolonged now for more than 30 years, a common political outlook, even if marked by ceaseless internecine quarrels, a common style of thought and perhaps composition, a common focus on intellectual interests, and once you get past politeness, which becomes these days easier and easier, a common ethnic origin. They are, or until recently, have been anti-communists. They are, or until some time ago, were radicals. They have a fondness for ideological speculation. They write literary criticism with a strong emphasis. They revel in polemic. They strive self-consciously to be brilliant, and by birth or osmosis, they are Jews. When I think of it now, my favorite historian, Moses Finley, could be very polemic. I don't know that he was ever considered part of the group. So let me go on with this chapter here. This was interesting too. The Jewish New York intellectuals were one of only a handful of intelligentsias in the United States. According to Bell, now who was Bell? I can't remember. Joshua Bell? I don't know. That's probably not the Bell. The Jewish New York intellectuals were one of only a handful. I will link this article if I can find it again in the description box of this video, so you can read the first chapter to this book. The Jewish New York intellectuals were one of only a handful of intelligentsias in the United States. According to Bell, the first distinct intelligentsia to emerge on this side of the Atlantic were the Greenwich Village intellectuals of the 1910s. Figures like Walter Lippmann, Van Wyck Brooks, John Reed, Waldo Frank, Sinclair Lewis, and Edmund Wilson were united by, quote, the protest against the genteel tradition, the domination of America by the small town, and the crabbed respectability which the small town enforced, unquote. The second intelligentsia was the lost generation of the Jazz Age. Disenchanted with American life in the wake of World War I, these literary expatriates looked abroad to Paris and included the Hemingways and Fitzgeralds. Third were the Southern agrarians that gathered at Vanderbilt University in the 1920s and 30s. They included Allen Tate, Robin Penn Warren, and John Crow Ransom. What they were defending, Bell wrote, was an agrarian way of life, the rhythms of a gentler time and quieter place, and with it a model of aristocratic learning which would take the word as text and ignore the mundane biographical and sociological. This is so reflective of the milieu in which I grew up in. The New York intellectuals differed from these other American intelligentsias in several ways, most significantly because of their Jewishness. They had no Yitzhus, I'm not sure what that means, a Yiddish word meaning eminent pedigree, Bell said. They did not flee the United States, but rather inherited the cultural establishment of America in ways that they, and certainly their fathers, poor Jews who had fled the shtells of the Pale of Settlement for the ghettos of the Lower East Side, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, could never have dreamed of. I don't know much about the shtells. It's spelled S-H-T-E-T-L-S. Don't know how to say that, but I do know a little bit about the Lower East Side. So it all resonances. And I like this idea of multiple intelligentsias, as they say, because it does seem to how things worked or work. You might even say cliques, to use a pejorative, multiple cliques. In the years after World War I, New York started becoming the Western world's cultural capital, rivaled only by Paris. Before the passage of immigration restriction, the city's being loved up on by multiple cats at once. You can't see it, but she's gone off, which is fine. Before the passage of immigration restriction, the city's population grew on average over 1 million a decade from the 1890s through the 1920s. New York Jews were heirs to the unique new polyglot melting pot that had been celebrated in the pre-war years, along with vaudeville and early motion pictures. In the Roaring 20s, the Jazz Age, New York had the unprecedented reach of radio and the uncontrollable festivity of the speakeasy belt, along with the uptown clubs and theaters where the Harlem Renaissance was flourishing. In the 1930s came a numerically small wave of refugees that included many famous writers, scientists, and orchestra conductors. They filled the city with highbrow culture, even though the anti-immigration laws of 1921 and 1924 allowed only the tiniest trickle from those parts of Europe, the Pale of Settlement, to enter. The New York intellectuals had grown up in that city in those years. It was their turf. So, we'll talk a little bit about the women members, and then I'll leave it there. A total of 7 women were considered full-fledged New York intellectuals. 5 of the 7 were romantically linked to men in the group. McCarthy, that's Mary McCarthy, I believe, had been involved with Philip Roth when he relaunched Partisan Review in 1937. Hardwick, too, was rumored to have had an affair with Roth. She went on to marry the poet Robert Lowell in 1949. Diana Trilling, Gertrude Himmelfarb, and Midge Decter were married to men in the group. Diana married Lionel Trilling in 1929. Himmelfarb married Irving Kristol in 1942, and Podhoretz and Decter wed in 1956. Podhoretz is one who I think I've read some kind of memoir of long time ago. And of course, Jason Epstein. He was the first book that I started out my reading project 2 years ago with. He has a memoir. Sort of insignificant stuff unless you're interested in this kind of stuff, which my interest has grown tenuous. But let me go on. Hannah Arendt, and Sontag, Susan Sontag, were the exceptions. Neither were romantically linked with any New York intellectual, but both were viewed as attractive and alluring, qualifications Jason Epstein suggested were essential for its women members. All of these women were brilliant, yet they were not always treated as intellectual equals. Moreover, to be part of this milieu, they too performed secular Jewish masculinity. They wrote like men. They would not have put it this way. They thought of themselves as just writers, but they were often scorned and seen as more acerbic than their male counterparts in the public realm because they had to perform the combative masculine identity that was the Jewish intellectual, or that was Jewish intellectual. So, as I say, I just remember when I was young and people were writing, this whole combative aspect to the literary culture, even in Chicago, was fairly strong. I've recently had a couple of blasts from the past. Pat at Book Chat with Pat posted a poem in her shorts by Lee Young Lee, a poet who made his start here in Chicago. I remember those days very well. And Luis Rodriguez, who wrote the memoir Always Running, which was big. He was a poet before that and very important on the local scene here. And I believe as his success flourished, he left the city. Chicago was too constricting for him, perhaps. And I would bet that Lee Young Lee left. I have not followed the careers of either of these men since, but they were, what is the thing? Crabs in a barrel, pulling down the ones that are trying to get out. That was the milieu here in Chicago back in those days, and I think we looked upon these men with envy and jealousy and that sort of thing. And I just have to say, particularly as I have seen it with BookTube, that the new literary milieu is so much more congenial than the one that was responding to, in some degree, the intelligentsia clique of New York. I believe James Baldwin was a part of it. It was not exclusively Jewish by any means, and the first chapter goes on to talk about that, how it's, I read the part where certain women could be accepted, even though they were not masculine or not male. And also, I believe James Baldwin was accepted somewhat, and others. So I just find it interesting, and I thought I would share that little bit of excerpt with you, and I will link we'll probably link Princeton University's site in the description box, where you can go read the entire first chapter and even buy that book if you would like to. Now, I just had another book come in a couple months ago, actually, from Princeton University, but they print a lot of nice stuff. And as you know, I've been in a reading slump for about 2 weeks. I am probably DNFing the book of the century, not this book, but the book that it's about, which was not speaking to me. And so I think I'm going to try to finish this, which has been lost for a couple of weeks, and maybe just hit some shorter things. I read an anthology of Portuguese poets, and I will try to share a little bit more of that with you. And this, which, as I say, is by Princeton University Press, they have some nice stuff. How to win an election. It might be something fitting for these times. Now, this is the brother of the more famous Cicero, and I have wanted to get my hands on this text for years, and only, as I say, a couple of months ago, I happened to be noodling around online and saw that this edition existed. It's a slim text, and a copy was available for $4, including shipping. So how could I pass that up? So I will possibly read this today and even add to my book count. I will count this as a book, and then I can bolster myself a little bit and say I finished a book, since I have effectively read nothing whilst I was trying and making little headway in a mammoth which was not for me at this time. And of course, that is how we would say things now. This is not for me at this time. We would not say this is a garbage book. And I really think that these changes are better. Of course, everyone remembers famous cases of, say, book reviewers who have said exactly, I don't have it here in the basement somewhere. My first book, The Requiem, got something locally, and I should read that to you. I forget what a figure on the poetry scene at that time said. This book makes me want to, I forget, take a dump or something. It was, and you know, you can think back to the reviews that John Keats got for his poetry. And we always remember book reviewers when we get it wrong. It's probably a tough profession in that regard, because I don't think we remember book reviewers when they get it right. And we would prefer our book reviewers to get it right. And I think the malicious rumor was spread that these couple of reviews of John Keats's poetry caused him to get sick and die. I believe Lord Byron perpetuated that malicious slander or whatever, which was, per the historical record, totally untruth. The thing is, if you are going to set yourself out in the public eye, perhaps less so in YouTube, but certainly as a writer, you have to have a bit of a skin for that kind of thing. And somebody will come along and tear you to shreds, and the next day you get up and you just keep walking. In fact, I mentioned in a video where I was taking the questions for my question and answer video, which I have just finally gotten ready for printing out so I can film that stuff. But I mentioned anecdotally the first time I took my book, The Requiem, for a reading. I think it might have been Myopic Books. And afterwards I did the question and answer. And I always liked question and answers, or would come to like them. But the very first question, the guy got up and said, how is it that such an idiot like you, and something like that could be up here reading your poetry, when you've got brilliant people like me in the audience. And that, I mean, that was not at all an unusual feature of the sort of rough and tumble literary scene that you found in Chicago in those days. And as I say, you get up, you slough it off, and you keep on. I mean, you know, people have been tearing Plato down since first his books became public, and Plato has withstood all of the diatribes and mocking that his work has endured. So, well, he has not, but his work has. And so that is just a facet of being a writer, and I would say to a degree, being a YouTuber. I don't think there is really much, is it cachet in coming out, again, wielding the pen as a lance and putting people down and insulting them with wild abandon. I don't think it gains anybody anything in the long run. I will stop this here. Thank you for stopping by my channel.